Mom, that account is just sitting there. You're not exactly spending it on anything, are you? That was my son, sitting at my kitchen table, the same table where I'd helped him with his grade 6 science project, where I'd held his hand after his first bad breakup, where I'd fed him and his wife and their 2 kids every Sunday for 11 years. He said it like it was obvious. Like I should have already known this was coming. I didn't answer right away. I got up and refilled my tea, mostly because I needed a moment to make sure I heard him correctly. I had. My name is Sandra. I'm 68 years old, and I live in a 2-bedroom house in Kitchener, Ontario that my husband Frank and I bought in 1991. We paid it off in 2009. We were proud of that. Frank used to joke that the mortgage burning party was the best party we ever threw. Better than our own wedding. We had neighbors over, made a bonfire in the backyard, cooked pierogies and cabbage rolls, and he held that final statement over the flames like he was presenting an Oscar. Frank died of a stroke 4 years ago on a Tuesday morning in February while he was shoveling the driveway. I found him face down in the snow. I don't talk about that part very much. What I will say is that after he died, something in the house shifted. It wasn't just the quiet, though the quiet was its own kind of grief. It was the way my son started looking at things. The house. My car. My RSP statements when he thought I wasn't paying attention. It was subtle at first. So subtle I told myself I was imagining it. I wasn't imagining it. My son. I'll call him my son because that's what he is. That's the relationship. And the name almost doesn't matter at this point. Is 41 years old. He works in logistics. His wife, my daughter-in-law, sells real estate, which means she knows what houses in my neighborhood are worth down to the decimal point. They have 2 children, a boy of 9 and a girl of 7, and they live in a semi-detached in Waterloo that they bought at the top of the market in 2021. I helped them with the down payment, $40,000. I want to be clear about that number because it matters later. At the time, I gave it without hesitation. Frank had left me in a decent position. We both worked our whole lives, saved carefully, had our pension from the city and his from the plant, and I had enough to be comfortable and still help my son get his family into a home. I was happy to do it. Genuinely happy. I thought that was what you did. That was the first transfer. What followed over the next 3 years was a pattern I didn't recognize while I was living inside it. My daughter-in-law's car needed new brakes and then the transmission went, and then it just made more sense to get something newer and could I help just a little? My grandson needed braces and the dental plan only covered half. My son's contract position didn't get renewed and there were 2 months of mortgage payments where they were stretched thin, and I was right there. I had the money. What kind of mother doesn't help? I helped. Every time I helped. I didn't keep a running tally, not consciously, but one evening last winter I sat down at the kitchen table with a notebook and a cup of instant coffee and I started writing down every transfer, every check, every e-transfer with the little note that said just until we get sorted or you're a lifesaver, Mom. The total was just over $96,000 in 3 years. I sat with that number for a long time. The furnace hummed. Outside, it was that particular Kitchener cold that gets into the window seams no matter what you do. I drank my coffee and I looked at that number and I tried to feel something other than very, very tired. The conversation about my bank account, the one where my son sat at my table and told me my savings were just sitting there, happened in March. He'd come over ostensibly to help me with the loose eaves trough, which he did fix. I'll give him that. But then we sat down for lunch. And that's when he said it. He had a whole case built. I could tell he'd thought about it, maybe talked it over with his wife the night before. He said that given current interest rates, my savings account wasn't keeping pace with inflation. He said that if I invested it differently, through a financial advisor he'd looked into, someone his wife's colleague recommended, I could see real returns. He was leaning forward, his elbows on the table, and he had this tone. Patient, the tone you use with someone who doesn't quite understand. I am not someone who doesn't understand. I worked in accounts payable for the city of Waterloo for 22 years. I understand money fine. I asked him what financial advisor he meant exactly. He said it was someone who specialized in estate planning and intergenerational wealth transfer. I said, "You mean someone who helps move my money to you?" He sat back. He said that wasn't what he meant. He said he was thinking about my future, my security, that he was worried about me rattling around in this big house alone, that maybe it would be worth thinking about whether this much space still made sense for one person. There it was. The house. I'd been waiting for the house to come up. My daughter-in-law had mentioned it twice in passing over the past year, once at Thanksgiving and once when they came over for my birthday in October. She'd said it almost gently, almost like a kindness. "This place must be a lot to keep up on your own." She'd looked at the kitchen ceiling when she said it, at the crack in the plaster that Frank had been meaning to fix for years, and that I hadn't fixed because I didn't want to cover the pencil marks on the door frame where we'd measured my son's height every birthday until he was 16. I told my son I needed to think about it. He nodded like that was very reasonable. He hugged me at the door and told me he loved me and that he just wanted what was best for me. I believed the first part. I wasn't sure about the second. What happened next I haven't told many people, but I think it's important because it's the thing that changed everything. About 2 weeks after that conversation, my granddaughter came over on a Saturday while her parents went to look at a property open house. My daughter-in-law was scouting listings. A normal weekend for them. My granddaughter is 7 and she is the kind of child who notices things. She has Frank's eyes, that exact shade of gray-green, and sometimes when she looks at me it knocks the air out of my chest. We were baking butter tarts, which is something we do, and she was sitting on the step stool at the counter rolling out pastry with her small, serious hands, and she said, without looking up, "Grandma, is it true you're selling your house?" I stopped what I was doing. I said, "Where did you hear that?" She said, "Daddy and Mommy were talking about it. Daddy said the money from the house would really help." I kept my voice very even. I said, "Did he?" She looked up at me then and she must have read something in my face because she said, "I don't want you to move, Grandma. I like your house. I like the marks on the door." She meant the pencil marks. She'd noticed those too. I hugged her and I told her the tarts needed another 5 minutes, and I turned back to the oven so she wouldn't see my face. That evening, after my son picked her up, I sat in the kitchen for a long time. The butter tarts were on the counter in a row. I'd given half to my granddaughter to take home and kept half for myself. I made a list. Not of transfers this time, but of questions. What did I actually want? What was I afraid of? What would Frank say? I knew what Frank would say. Frank would say, "Sandy, don't let anyone rush you out of your own life." I called my cousin the next morning. She lives in Burlington, and we've been close since childhood, and she's the kind of person who will tell you the truth without flinching. I told her everything. The transfers, the account conversation, the open house, what my granddaughter had said about the pencil marks on the door. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Sandra, I think you already know what you need to do." She was right. I did know. I called my bank the next week. I have a good relationship with my financial advisor there. A woman I've dealt with for many years, not some referral from my daughter-in-law's colleague. I reviewed everything. I consolidated some accounts, set up a new structure, and made sure I was the sole authorized person on anything that mattered. Then I called a lawyer. I want to say this plainly because I think people don't talk about it enough. You are allowed to write a will that reflects your actual wishes. You are allowed to give your estate to whomever you choose. In Canada, there is no law that says you must leave your children a specific portion of your estate. You can leave a spouse or dependent child a dependence relief claim in some provinces, but an adult child who has received nearly $100,000 in support over 3 years and owns his own home is not a dependent. My lawyer explained all of this. She was calm and practical, and she had seen versions of my situation before. I updated my will. I will not tell you exactly what I decided because that is private, but I will tell you that my primary beneficiary is now my granddaughter, held in trust until she is 25, administered by my cousin in Burlington. I made provisions for some friends, for a charity Frank and I used to donate to every year, the food bank in Kitchener that helped us once, Briefly, in 1994 when we were young, and the plant went on strike and we had 2 weeks of groceries left and too much pride to ask anyone we knew. I also wrote a letter to my son, not an angry letter, not a dramatic one, just a clear one. I told him that I loved him, that I was grateful for the good years, that I understood money creates pressure and pressure changes people. I told him that I had made my decisions about my estate and my home and my life, and that those decisions were final, and that I hoped very much we could find our way back to something real between us, but that would require honesty on his part that I wasn't sure he was capable of yet. I mailed it because email felt too easy to dismiss. He called me 2 days later. It was not a good conversation. He said I was being paranoid. He said he had never suggested taking my money. He said his wife was hurt. He said I had misunderstood everything. I listened to all of it. Then I said, I'm not going to argue about what was said or what was meant. I'm telling you what I've decided. He said, so that's it? You're just cutting us off? I said, I'm not cutting anyone off. I'm just not writing any more checks. He hung up. He hasn't called back. That was 6 months ago. I won't pretend it doesn't hurt. It does. It hurts in the particular way that only your children can hurt you. The way that gets into the part of your chest where you stored every first tooth and every fever, and every morning they crawled into your bed because they'd had a bad dream. It hurts even when you know you were right. My daughter-in-law sent me a message 3 weeks later, very polished, saying she hoped I was well and that the kids missed me and maybe we could all get together for Easter. There was no acknowledgement of anything, just the suggestion of Easter and a little emoji of a tulip. I'd thought about it for a long time. Then I wrote back and said I would love to see the grandchildren and suggested they come here to my house without the larger conversation needing to happen. They didn't come for Easter, but my son did drop the kids off one afternoon in May for a few hours, without coming in himself. My grandson was quiet. My granddaughter ran straight to the kitchen and asked if we could make butter tarts. We made butter tarts. She helped roll the pastry with her small, serious hands, and at some point she climbed down from the step stool and went to the door frame and stood against it. "Grandma," she said, "did you measure Daddy here when he was little?" I said yes. I told her his marks were the ones with the little star beside them because he always insisted on a star. She looked at the column of pencil marks, her daddy's whole childhood in faded lines, and she reached up as high as she could and pressed her back flat against the doorframe. "Can you measure me?" she asked. I got a pencil. I measured her. I made a small neat line and wrote her name and the date beside it. She looked at it for a moment, this mark she'd made in my house, proof that she was here, that she was growing, that someone had noticed. "Good," she said, very seriously. And then she went back to the butter tarts. I stayed at the doorframe for a moment. I pressed my hand flat against all those marks, Frank's handwriting and mine. Decades of Sundays and growing children and ordinary life. This house is not too big for one person. This house is exactly the right size for everything that still lives in it. I'm still here. I plan to stay. I keep thinking about that notebook. The one I sat down with on a winter night in Kitchener, just me and a cup of instant coffee and a pencil, adding up numbers I'd spent 3 years not looking at too closely. $96,000. That's not an accident. That's a pattern. And patterns don't just happen. They grow in the space between what we're willing to see and what we choose to ignore. I don't say that to be hard on myself. I say it because I think honesty is the beginning of everything. Frank used to say, you can't fix what you won't name. He was right about most things. What I've come to understand, sitting with all of it, is that what happened to me wasn't just about money. It was about what I believed love looked like. I believed it looked like saying yes. I believed that a good mother kept the door open, kept writing the checks, kept being useful. And there's nothing wrong with generosity. Nothing at all. But generosity without clear eyes isn't really generosity. It's just fear wearing a kind face. Fear of being difficult. Fear of being needed less. fear of the quiet that comes when you stop being the one who provides. Sandra had to learn to look clearly. That took courage I didn't know I had, and it came slowly, the way most real things do. My granddaughter, Lily, she didn't know she was teaching me anything when she stood at that doorframe and asked to be measured, but she was. She was showing me that what matters is presence. Genuine, unhurried, wanting nothing presence. She didn't come to my house with a plan. She came because she wanted to make butter tarts, and she wanted to know if I was still there. That kind of love is simple, and it's real, and it doesn't come with a follow-up ask. My son is not a bad person. I want to say that plainly. He is a person under pressure who made choices I couldn't keep enabling. There's a difference. And I hope that one day he'll understand that the most honest thing I ever did for him was stop. Not to punish him, but because continuing would have been a lie, and he deserved the truth more than he deserved another check. What I've learned is this: how we handle money with the people we love reveals something about our character, our judgment, and our backbone. All three matter. Character is what you do when it would be easier to stay quiet. Judgment is knowing the difference between help that lifts someone up and help that holds them in place. And backbone, that's the part that most of us have to build slowly, the way you build anything real, one hard decision at a time. I'm still building mine. I'm 68 years old and I'm still learning what I'm made of. I think that's fine. I think that's actually something to be grateful for. The pencil mark on the doorframe with Lily's name beside it. That's mine too now. Proof that something is still growing here.